Sarah Johnson froze when she saw her 9-year-old daughter Emma crying desperately at the bedroom door. For 4 weekends in a row, the girl begged not to go to the church camp. Emma had always loved these mountain retreats, but now she trembled and clung to the doorframe as if her life depended on it. "Mum, please don't leave me alone with him," said the girl with red and swollen eyes. When Sarah finally decided to follow the missionary to the Colorado mountain camp, what she discovered about the most respected man in the community made her blood run cold. But to understand how Sarah got to this point of despair, you have to go back 3 months, when everything still seemed normal and safe. Sarah Johnson, 34, worked as a nurse at Boulder Community Health Hospital outside Boulder, Colorado. She had been Emma's single mother since the difficult divorce 2 years earlier, when her ex-husband decided to start life over in another state, leaving behind the family he had built. Sarah went to great lengths to ensure that Emma had a happy and safe childhood, even with all the financial and emotional hardships she faced on her own. Emma was a cheerful girl, full of life, with curly brown hair and bright green eyes that lit up any room. At age 9, she loved singing, drawing and participating in the activities of Mount Grace Church, a welcoming religious community that Sarah and Emma had attended for 5 years. The church was in Old Boulder, in a red brick building surrounded by tall trees and a manicured garden. For Sarah, that place represented more than faith. It was a safe haven, a second family that supported her in the most difficult moments after the divorce. Missionary David Carter, 42, was the community's most admired spiritual leader. A married man, father of 2 teenage children, he dedicated his life to working with children and young people. Everyone in the church spoke of him with respect and affection. David organized spiritual retreats, Rocky Mountain camps, catechesis classes, and community events. He had a gentle smile, a calm voice, and always a word of comfort for those who needed it. Sarah trusted him completely, as did all the other families at Mount Grace. Life in Boulder followed a quiet and predictable routine. Emma attended Meadowbrook Elementary, where she was in the 4th grade and had good grades. Every morning, Sarah prepared breakfast while Emma got ready, humming songs she learned in the church's children's choir. On Sundays, mother and daughter woke up early, put on their best clothes, and went to the 10 o'clock service. Emma would run to the back room, where the children's activities coordinated by David Carter took place, while Sarah joined the other mothers in the main ship. Sarah worked shifts at the hospital, sometimes during the day, sometimes at night, and relied heavily on the religious community for emotional and social support. When she needed to work on weekends, other mothers in the church took turns caring for Emma. When money tightened at the end of the month, Mount Grace's community pantry made sure there was no shortage of food at home. Sarah felt blessed to be part of that spiritual family. In this video, you'll discover how one mother trusted her maternal instinct, even when everyone said she was overreacting. You'll see how small signs, which most would ignore, became the key to saving your daughter. Courage and determination can change everything in a matter of hours. Every detail here is based on true events that shocked the small community of Boulder and forever changed the way those families viewed the protection of their children. If you've made it this far, it's because real history interests you. Help this content reach more people, leave the like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell. Everything began to change on a Friday in September, when the air in the Rocky Mountains was already bringing the freshness of the approaching autumn. Sarah had left the hospital early to pick up Emma after the children's choir rehearsal, which took place every Friday at 5 in the afternoon. She arrived at Mount Grace Church at 5:40, a few minutes before the end time, and parked her old but trusty car on the side of the red brick building. As she walked towards the side entrance that gave access to the children's hall, Sarah heard the voices of the children singing an upbeat song about love and faith. She smiled, recognizing Emma's voice among the others, that high-pitched, crystalline timbre that always stood out. Sarah waited outside, not wanting to interrupt the last minutes of the rehearsal, leaning against the brick wall still warmed by the afternoon sun. When the song ended, Sarah heard David Carter's voice, thanking the children for their effort and freeing everyone to leave. The doors opened and children of different ages began to run out excitedly, looking for their parents in the parking lot. Sarah waited to see Emma leave with the others, but the girl did not appear. After a few minutes, when almost all the children had left, Sarah entered the hall to look for her daughter. What she saw planted the first seed of discomfort in her heart. Emma sat alone on a wooden bench in the corner of the chapel, her eyes red and her hands trembling on her lap. The girl stared at the ground as if she was lost in thoughts too heavy for a 9-year-old child to carry. "Emma, are you okay, my love?" Sarah asked, her voice full of concern, as she knelt in front of her daughter, placing her hands gently on the girl's small, trembling knees. "Yes, I am, Mom. I'm just tired," Emma replied, but her voice came out weak, unconvinced, and she kept avoiding Sarah's gaze. Before Sarah could insist on the question, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned and saw David Carter approaching with his usual gentle smile, his hands in his pants pockets, his grey hair perfectly combed. "Sarah, it's good to see you," he said in that calm and welcoming voice that always reassured everyone around. "Emma is a special girl, very special indeed." As he said this, David placed a hand on Emma's shoulder, a gesture that might have seemed fatherly and affectionate. But Sarah noticed something that made her shudder inside. Emma cringed. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible movement, but Sarah knew her daughter's every reaction. Emma had flinched at the missionary's touch, like a frightened animal recoiling from a threat. "Thank you, Pastor David." "Emma really loves singing in the choir," Sarah replied automatically, still processing what she had just witnessed. "She has a wonderful gift. God has special plans for her," David continued, removing his hand from Emma's shoulder and turning his attention to Sarah. "We are preparing something very beautiful for the next retreat in the mountains. I'm sure Emma will love it." Sarah thanked her again, took Emma by the hand, and left the church with a strange clutch on her chest. All the way home, Emma stood quietly in the back seat of the car, looking out the window as the Rocky Mountains drew against the orange sunset sky. Sarah tried to talk, to ask questions about the rehearsal, about the songs, but Emma answered with monosyllables, lost in her own thoughts. That night, after Emma finally fell asleep, Sarah lay awake in the living room, a cup of tea cooling between her hands. She couldn't stop thinking about the scene she had witnessed. That retreat of Emma, at the touch of David Carter, the red eyes, the unusual silence. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe Emma really was just tired. Perhaps Sarah was seeing things where there was nothing to see. But something inside her, that maternal instinct that every mother carries deep in her chest, whispered that something wasn't right. The following week, Sarah received a letter from the church. The white envelope arrived in the mail on a rainy Tuesday, and Sarah opened it while Emma was at school. It was a colorful, well-crafted brochure advertising the 3-day spiritual retreat in the mountains for children between the ages of 8 and 12, led by missionary David Carter. The camp would take place at Camp Harmony, a site in the Rocky Mountains 2 hours from Boulder, and would be a wonderful opportunity for faith-building and fellowship among children, the text with decorative letters said. Sarah immediately recalled the previous retreats. Emma always came back from them radiant, telling stories about the outdoor games, the bonfires at night, the songs sung under the stars. The girl loved those camps. Sarah kept the booklet to show Emma when she got home from school, certain that the news would make her excited. But Emma's reaction was completely unexpected and disturbing. When Sarah showed the colorful booklet after dinner, Emma was drinking a glass of juice at the kitchen table. Upon seeing the paper, the girl froze. Her eyes widened, and Sarah saw something in that look that she had never seen before. Fear. Pure and genuine fear. "No, Mom, "I don't want to go," Emma said, pushing the leaflet away as if it burned her hands. "But daughter, you've always loved camping." "What happened?" Sarah asked, sitting next to Emma and trying to understand this radical change in behavior. "I just don't want to go, Mom. Please don't force me," Emma insisted, and Sarah saw tears begin to form at the corners of those green eyes she loved so much. "But why, my love? Can you tell me? Did anything happen in the last camp?" Emma shook her head negatively, but she couldn't hold back the tears that began to flow down her face. Before Sarah could ask any more questions, Emma got up from her chair and ran into the bedroom, slamming the door behind her. Sarah sat there in the kitchen, the colourful booklet on the table, her heart sinking with worry and confusion. Was it just a phase? Had something happened that Emma didn't want to tell, or would it be something more serious? Over the next few days, Sarah tried several times to talk to Emma about the camp, but the girl would change the subject or make excuses every time the topic came up. Emma, who had always been an open and communicative child, suddenly seemed to be carrying a weight that she couldn't share even with her mother. On a Thursday night, Sarah decided to try a more direct approach. She waited until Emma was lying in bed, ready to sleep, and then sat on the edge of the mattress, gently stroking her daughter's curly hair. The light from the lampshade created a warm and safe environment, perfect for confidences. "Emma, if something is bothering you, you can tell me always, my love. You know that, right? No matter what it is, I will listen to you and I will protect you." "Always," Sarah said, in the softest, most affectionate voice she could. Emma was silent for a long moment, only staring at the ceiling decorated with phosphorescent stars. Then she turned her head to her mother, and Sarah saw tears shining in the girl's eyes. "It's just that Pastor David, he's very insistent, Mom. He always wants to be alone with me to talk about special things," Emma whispered, her voice breaking. Sarah felt her heart tighten so much that for a moment she thought it would stop beating. She forced her voice to remain calm, even with the alarm ringing inside her chest. "What kind of special things, daughter? Things about God, about being chosen, about having a special mission. But I don't like it, Mom. I feel strange when he talks to me like that. I feel—" Emma replied, uncomfortable, using a word too big for a 9-year-old, a word she had clearly learned trying to describe something she couldn't fully name. "And what else does he do when you're alone?" Sarah insisted, struggling to keep her breathing steady. He puts his hand on my shoulder, sometimes in my hair, and it is very close. And she says that I shouldn't tell anyone because it's special, because God chose only me," Emma explained before turning to the pillow, signaling that she didn't want to talk about it anymore. Sarah sat there for a few more minutes, caressing Emma's back until the girl's breathing calmed and she finally fell asleep. Then Sarah left the room with wobbly legs and an immense weight on her conscience. She went to the kitchen, grabbed a glass of ice water, and tried to organize the thoughts that ran out of control in her mind. On the one hand, her maternal instinct screamed that something was deeply wrong. Emma's change in behavior, the fear in her eyes, the secret conversations, the touches, the request for secrecy. All of these were classic signs of something inappropriate happening. But on the other hand, Sarah questioned herself. David Carter was the most respected missionary in the community. Family man, dedicated to children for years, admired by all. Wouldn't she be exaggerating? Wouldn't you be misinterpreting legitimate spiritual mentoring work? Sarah spent the night awake, torn between instinct and reason, between the fear of being wrong and the terror of being right. If this revelation is arousing in you a deep curiosity about what really happened, comment right now. I want more stories, and please leave your like on this video. The following Sunday, Sarah decided to do a discreet investigation. She arrived at Mount Grace Church earlier than usual and sought to talk to other mothers in the congregation to see if their children were also showing any resistance to the camp or strange behavior toward Pastor David. Sarah found Jennifer Martinez, mother of 10-year-old Sophia, organizing the newsletters at the entrance of the church. Jennifer was a lively woman of Mexican origin, always smiling and willing to help. The two had a superficial friendship based on quick conversations on Sundays. "Jennifer, is your child going to camp?" Sarah asked casually, trying not to show the anxiety she felt inside. "Of course! Sophia is super excited. She can't stop talking about it. Pastor David is amazing with the kids. My daughter loves him," Jennifer replied with a genuine smile, "and she never mentioned anything strange." "Any discomfort?" began asking Sarah, but was interrupted by the arrival of Lisa Patterson, another mother from the community. "Sarah, and your daughter? Is Emma going too?" questioned Lisa, a blonde woman in her 40s, always well-dressed and perfumed. Sarah hesitated, feeling the eyes of the two women on her. "Emma is still a little undecided. She has shown some resistance to the encampment." The two mothers exchanged glances, and Lisa commented in a tone that mixed understanding and a hint of condescension. "Oh, Sarah, you know what children are like. Sometimes they want to go, sometimes they don't. They go through phases. But Pastor David has a special way of caring for them. He really dedicates himself to each child individually. It's a blessing to have someone like that in our community." That word again, special. The same one Emma had used, the same one that David Carter repeated constantly. Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. "Don't you think he spends a lot of time alone with the kids?" Sarah ventured, trying to probe if anyone else shared her concerns. Jennifer frowned. "Sarah, he's the missionary, it's his job. And he always did that with all the children. There has never been any problem in all these years." "Exactly," Lisa agreed. "My oldest son, who is now 16 years old, attended Pastor David's groups as a child, and it was a wonderful experience. Are you worried about anything specific?" Sarah realized she was alone. No one else saw any problem. No one suspected it anymore. She returned home that Sunday, feeling isolated in her worry, wondering if she wasn't seeing danger where there wasn't any. Could it be that her difficult divorce, her life as a single mother always on alert, her fatigue from working at the hospital, all this was not making her imagine things? Wasn't he projecting his own fears onto a completely innocent situation? But what happened in the next few hours would destroy all the certainties she had. On Monday morning, Sarah received a call from the church office asking if Emma would attend the camp as the application deadline was ending. Sarah said she was still deciding and asked for one more day to confirm. She hung up the phone and stared out the kitchen window, watching the Rocky Mountains rise in the distance against the blue Colorado sky. Then suddenly, something inside her lit up. An iron determination took hold of Sarah. She wasn't going to ignore her maternal instinct. She wasn't going to let Emma face something that clearly scared her alone. But she also wouldn't just stop her daughter from going to camp without being sure what was going on. Sarah needed proof. I needed to know the truth. At that moment, Sarah made a risky and unconventional decision. She would enroll Emma in camp, but she would not sit idly by at home. Sarah would follow the group to Camp Harmony and keep an eye on her, discreetly, watching everything that happened. If her suspicions were just overprotective mother paranoia, she would be relieved and mentally apologize for doubting. But if there was really something wrong, she would be there to protect her daughter. On Thursday night, the eve of her departure for camp, Sarah sat down with Emma in the living room. The soft light from the lamp created warm shadows on the beige-painted walls. Sarah held her daughter's small hands between hers and looked deeply into the green eyes she loved so much. "Look, my love, I know you're scared of this camp. I know you don't want to go, but I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to trust me," Sarah began, her voice firm but affectionate. Emma looked at her mother wide-eyed, waiting. "I want you to go to camp, but I promise, I swear to you that I'll be close, okay? I won't let anything bad happen to you, not for a second." "You need to believe me," Sarah said, shaking Emma's hands tighter. "Will you be there, Mom?" "But how?" Mothers don't go to camp, Emma asked, confused. I'll be there. You won't see me, but I'll be watching. And the moment you feel anything strange, anything that makes you uncomfortable, I want you to get out of wherever you are and shout my name, and I'll be there. Can you trust me? Emma nodded slowly, and then threw herself into her mother's arms, clinging tightly. Sarah hugged her daughter, feeling her heart beat fast in her chest. She was doing the right thing. It had to be. On Friday morning, Sarah took Emma to the meeting point in front of Mount Grace Church. It was 7 o'clock in the morning, and the sun was still low on the horizon, painting the sky with pink and golden tones. A yellow school bus was parked in front of the church, and 15 children between the ages of 8 and 12 gathered with their backpacks and sleeping bags, excited and talkative. David Carter was standing in the doorway of the bus, greeting every child who entered, checking names on a clipboard. He wore a blue plaid shirt and jeans, with a church cap on his head, looking more like a camp monitor than a formal religious leader. When he saw Emma approaching with Sarah, David bent down to be at the girl's height. "I'm glad you came, Emma. God has special plans for you this weekend," he said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. The way he said it, the emphasis on the word special, the way he looked at Emma, all of this confirmed that she was making the right choice by following the group. Emma boarded the bus without looking back, finding a window seat. Sarah waved to her until the bus left, kicking up dust on the road. So Sarah quickly returned to her car, grabbed the backpack she had prepared the night before with water, snacks and binoculars, and got into the vehicle. An hour later, when she was sure the bus was far enough away that they wouldn't notice they were being followed, Sarah started her car and took the road to the Rocky Mountains, determined to uncover the truth about missionary David Carter. If this story is already changing the way you see maternal protection, like subscribe and activate the bell in this video so that this message reaches other mothers. The road to Camp Harmony winded through Colorado's Rocky Mountains, climbing steadily through towering pine trees and towering rock formations. Sarah drove with her hands firmly on the wheel, keeping a safe distance from the yellow school bus ahead. The sky was a deep blue, without a single cloud, and the air that came in through the half-open window brought the fresh smell of the mountains and the pines. During the 2-hour trip, Sarah had plenty of time to think, to question her own decision, to ask herself if she wasn't exaggerating. But every time doubt began to set in, she remembered Emma's face, of red eyes, genuine fear, from the retreat to the touch of David Carter. And so Sarah knew she was doing the right thing, even though everyone thought she was crazy. The bus eventually left the main road and onto a narrow dirt road, marked by a rustic wooden sign that read Camp Harmony with hand-carved lettering. Sarah slowed down and waited for the bus to disappear through the trees before heading the same way. She drove slowly, looking for an inconspicuous place to park her car where she could observe without being seen. Sarah found the perfect spot, about 200 yards before the camp's main clearing. It was a small detour in the road, almost hidden by young bushes and pines, from where she could see the wooden huts scattered among the tallest trees. Sarah parked the car, grabbed her binoculars, and left, walking silently through the woods until she found a prime vantage point behind a moss-covered rock formation. From there, she had a clear view of the camp. There were 4 main huts, all made of logs of weather-darkened timber with gabled roofs covered in red shingles. One of the huts was clearly the administrative and dining area, with a chimney giving off a thin line of smoke. The other 3 were dormitories. Sarah saw David Carter organizing the children, dividing boys and girls into separate huts, distributing the chores, and explaining the rules of the camp. Everything seemed completely normal and innocent. Throughout the afternoon, Sarah observed the activities through binoculars. The children played ball in a grassy clearing, participated in group dynamics, sang religious songs sitting in a circle, and said collective prayers before lunch. Emma seemed to be fine, playing with other girls, smiling from time to time. Sarah began to feel ridiculous hiding there as a spy, watching a perfectly ordinary camp through binoculars. Maybe Emma was just going through a phase of insecurity. Perhaps the girl was mistaking the special attention of a dedicated religious leader for something inappropriate. Perhaps Sarah was projecting her own fears as an overprotective single mother into a completely innocent situation. Maybe she should just go home, mentally apologize for doubting David Carter, and let Emma enjoy the camp in peace. But as the sun began to set behind the Rocky Mountains, painting the sky orange and purple, Sarah saw something that made her stomach churn and all maternal instinct explode inside her chest. David Carter approached Emma, who was sitting alone on a wooden bench near the girl's hut, and called out to her with a hand gesture. Sarah saw Emma hesitate, look around as if seeking help, and then slowly get up. David put his hand on the girl's back and guided her toward a secluded cabin at the bottom of the grounds, away from the other children, away from the other monitors, a small wooden building that Sarah hadn't noticed before because it was half hidden among the denser pines. Sarah felt the blood run cold in her veins. All his suspicions, all his fears, all the signs he had tried to rationalize, all came back with full force. She stepped out from behind the rock formation and began walking briskly down the trail toward the secluded cabin, her heart beating so hard it seemed to echo among the surrounding trees. Nothing in this story happened by chance. What you are discovering here may be the missing piece to understand everything. Stay until the end, as the most surprising moment is yet to come. Sarah moved through the woods as quietly as she could, dodging dry branches and leaves that could rumble beneath her feet. The daylight was rapidly diminishing, and the shadows among the pine trees were becoming denser and more threatening. She could see the small, secluded hut ahead, a simple single-room building with a window on each side and a wooden door in front. When she got close to the building, Sarah crouched behind a dense bush and listened. For a moment, all she could hear was her own racing heart and the sound of the wind in the trees. Then muffled voices began to leak through the wooden walls of the cabin. Sarah moved closer, crawling until she was next to one of the windows, partially covered by a plain fabric curtain. She stood up slowly, just enough to be able to look through a crack between the curtain and the window frame. What Sarah saw at that moment made all the blood run from her face, made her legs weak, made her stomach butterflies that were almost unbearable. David Carter was sitting very close to Emma on a narrow bed leaning against the wall of the cabin. Too close, his hand was resting on the girl's knee. Emma had her eyes fixed on the floor, her body visibly tense, her shoulders bent inwards as if she were trying to make herself smaller, trying to disappear. "Emma, you are special, very special," David said in a soft but firm voice, leaning even closer to the girl. "God has chosen you to receive blessings that other children do not. Do you understand that?" Emma nodded slightly, but Sarah could see that it wasn't a nod of agreement. It was a nod of fear, of a child who doesn't know how to escape an uncomfortable situation with an adult in authority. "Our meetings are a sacred secret, Emma. Do you understand that? It's not something you should tell your mom or other people. It's between you, me, and God. A special gift that God has given us," David continued, lightly squeezing Emma's knee. Sarah felt the anger explode inside her, but she forced herself to keep watching, to keep gathering evidence of what she was witnessing. She took her phone from her pocket with trembling hands and started recording through the window, even though she knew the image quality wouldn't be good due to the low light and angle. Suddenly, David got up and went to a small wooden table in the corner of the cabin. He took a digital camera that was propped up there. Sarah felt her stomach churn even more. David returned to Emma, adjusting the camera settings. "I'm going to take some of your pictures for my personal archive of the blessed children. It's a way to document the special work God is doing in you," he said, raising his camera. Emma looked up for the first time, and Sarah saw panic in that green look she knew so well. The girl opened her mouth as if to say something, protest, refuse, but then closed again, clearly without the courage to challenge the authority figure that was missionary David Carter. Sarah felt her legs wobble. She needed to act. Now. I couldn't wait a second longer. It didn't matter if it was being recorded or not. It didn't matter if it had enough evidence or not. It didn't matter anything else other than getting his daughter out of that cabin immediately. Sarah put her phone away, took a deep breath, trying to control the mixture of anger and fear that simmered inside her, and prepared to act. She walked around the cabin toward the front door, her hands clenched into fists, her whole body trembling with adrenaline. When she got in front of the door, Sarah didn't hesitate. She turned the handle hard and pushed the door open, and it slammed open and slammed against the inner wall with a bang that seemed to echo throughout the surrounding forest. "What's going on here?" Sarah screamed, her voice coming out much louder and firmer than she expected, charged with all the maternal fury that had built up over weeks of suspicion and worry. Emma and David jumped in, frightened by the sudden intrusion. Emma immediately rose from the bed, her eyes wide, tears beginning to form. Sarah ran to her daughter and pulled her into her arms, hugging her with protective strength, placing her own body between Emma and David Carter. David quickly put the camera behind his back and stood up, his hands outstretched in a gesture that tried to be appeasing. "Sarah, please, you're misinterpreting the situation," he said, his voice still calm, but with a tone of urgency that wasn't there before. "Misinterpreting," Sarah repeated, her voice trembling with anger. "Misinterpreting you alone with my 9-year-old daughter in a secluded cabin, with a camera saying it's a secret she can't tell anyone? This is not a spiritual conversation, David. This is completely inadequate." "Sarah, you need to listen to me," David tried, taking a step towards them, but Sarah immediately took a step back, pushing Emma behind her. "Don't come near us! Not one more step!" Sarah ordered, the voice coming out like the growl of an animal protecting her cub. "I do this with all the kids, Sarah. It is an individual mentoring work approved by the church leadership. You can ask anyone. I'm just offering personalized spiritual guidance," David explained, trying to keep his composure, but Sarah could see sweat starting to form on his forehead. She could see his eyes moving quickly, looking for a way out of the situation. One-on-one mentoring locked in a secluded cabin, with a camera, asking her to keep it a secret? "Do you think I was born yesterday, David?" Sarah pressed Emma closer to her, feeling her daughter's small body tremble with fear and relief at the same time. Emma was weeping silently, her face buried in Sarah's coat, her little fists clutching the fabric with desperate force. Sarah knew at that moment, with absolute certainty, that her instinct was not wrong. Her maternal instinct was never wrong. And she had arrived on time. He had protected his daughter. She had done the right thing by following that bus into the mountains, by ignoring the voices that said she was exaggerating, by trusting that tightness in her chest that every mother knows when something threatens her child. "We're going away now," Sarah said firmly, starting to retreat toward the door, keeping Emma protected behind her, never taking her eyes off David Carter. "And you, David, you won't get close to my daughter ever again, never again." Sarah couldn't sleep that night. After leaving the secluded cabin with Emma in her arms, she had taken her daughter straight to the car parked in the woods, not caring if anyone would see them. Emma cried the entire way, her small body shaking as Sarah hurriedly drove down the dirt road, wanting to put as much distance as possible between them and David Carter. But as the adrenaline began to subside and Sarah found herself back home, lying next to Emma, who had finally fallen asleep from exhaustion, thoughts began to multiply in her mind. Did she have proof? Was the recording on the mobile phone clear enough? Had David Carter really done something illegal or just inappropriate? What if he convinced everyone that Sarah was just an overprotective, paranoid mother? What if he continued to have access to other children? Sarah knew she couldn't just let it go. Not after what I had seen, not after confirming that her maternal instinct was right from the start. She needed to act, but she needed to do it in the right way, with concrete evidence, with the support of other people, with the strength that only comes from the shared truth. On Saturday morning, Sarah woke up with an iron determination burning in her chest. Emma was still fast asleep, finally relaxed after the ordeal of the night before. Sarah made coffee, pulled out her cell phone, and started making calls. The first was for Jennifer Martinez, Sophia's mother, who was also at the camp. "Jennifer, I need to talk to you urgently. It's about Pastor David and the camp," Sarah said as soon as Jennifer answered. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Sarah, what happened? You disappeared last night." The children said Emma left early. Sarah took a deep breath and told her everything. He told of the weeks of Emma's strange behavior, of the decision to follow the group to Camp Harmony, of what he had seen through the window of the secluded cabin. Jennifer was silent for a long moment, and Sarah almost thought the call had dropped. "My God, Sarah," Jennifer whispered finally, her voice trembling. I never suspected it. He always seemed so dedicated, so trustworthy. "Jennifer, I need to know something. Did Pastor David ever take Sophia for private conversations? Did you ask her to keep secrets? Did you take pictures of her?" Sarah asked, clutching the phone so tightly that her fingers turned white. There was another long break. I don't know. I never asked. Sophia never mentioned anything like that, but now that you're talking, she's been quieter lately, more distant. I thought it was an age thing, but..." Jennifer didn't finish the sentence. "Can you ask her? Carefully, without forcing, but you can ask if Pastor David ever made her feel uncomfortable," Sarah asked. "I'm going to ask right now. And Sarah, thank you for having the courage to follow her instinct. If what you're saying is true, you may have saved a lot of kids," Jennifer said before hanging up. Sarah made 3 more calls that morning to other Mount Grace mothers whose children had gone to camp. Some reacted with incredulity, others with indignation, but all promised to talk to their children. Sarah knew she was opening a box of secrets that could change that entire community forever, but she had no choice. Protecting children came before any institutional loyalty. When Emma finally woke up, it was already noon. Sarah prepared the girls' favorite breakfast, pancakes with honey and strawberries, and the two sat down at the kitchen table. Sunlight poured in through the window, creating golden patterns on the checkered tablecloth. Emma ate slowly, in silence, her eyes still swollen from crying. "My love, I need you to be very brave now," Sarah began, taking Emma's small hand on the table. "What Pastor David did yesterday was not right, and I need to make sure he doesn't do that to any other kids. You understand?" Emma nodded slightly but said nothing. "Other mothers will talk to their children today. And if we find out that Pastor David has done similar things to other children, we will need to tell the authorities. We will need to be strong and tell the truth," Sarah continued, shaking her daughter's hand tenderly. "I'm afraid, Mom. What if no one believes us? What if everyone gets angry?" Emma whispered, tears beginning to roll down her face again. "I'll be with you every step of the way. And the truth always wins in the end, my love. Always," Sarah promised, getting up to hug her daughter. Sarah's phone rang that Saturday afternoon. It was Jennifer, and her voice was charged with emotion as Sarah answered. "Sarah, you were right. Completely right," Jennifer said, her voice breaking. "I talked to Sophia. At first, she didn't want to talk. But when I said it was safe, that I would believe her, she told me everything. Pastor David has been taking her to the same secluded hut for the past 6 months. He takes pictures. He says they are special, chosen by God. He makes her promise that she won't tell anyone." Sarah felt her stomach churn, a mixture of validation and absolute horror. 6 months. Sophia had been going through that for 6 months. "There's more," continued Jennifer. "I called Lisa Patterson and Amanda Reed. They talked to their children too. Tyler, Lisa's 11-year-old son, said that Pastor David asks him to take off his shirt in the photos. It says that it is to represent spiritual purity. And Mia, Amanda's 8-year-old daughter, said that Pastor David touches her hair in a strange way and makes her sit on his lap during private conversations." Sarah closed her eyes, fighting back the tears of anger that threatened to fall. How many children? How many families trusted that man as he manipulated and abused the innocence of their children? "Sarah, what do we do now?" Jennifer asked. "Now we go to the main hut where the other camp supervisors are. But we can't do it alone. Can you go back there with me, all together, with our children?" "We need strength in numbers," Sarah said, already reaching for the keys to the car. 2 hours later, Sarah, Jennifer, Lisa, and Amanda were back at Camp Harmony with their children. The afternoon sun was still high in the sky as they parked their cars at the entrance to the camp. Sarah could see the other children playing in the clearing, completely oblivious to what was about to happen. She held Emma by the hand as the 4 mothers walked determinedly toward the main cabin. Martha Stevens, the camp coordinator, was on the balcony of the cabin organizing material for the evening's activities. She was a 60-year-old lady, grey hair tied in a bun, glasses hanging from a chain around her neck, and had worked at Mount Grace Church for more than 20 years. Martha had been one of the first people to welcome Sarah when she arrived in the congregation, always offering words of comfort and practical support. "Martha, I need to talk to you. It is urgent." "It's about Pastor David," Sarah said, climbing the wooden steps of the porch, his voice steady but his heart beating. Martha looked at the group of mothers and children with an expression of genuine concern. "What's wrong, honey? Did something happen?" Sarah took a deep breath and began to explain. She told about what she had seen in the secluded hut the night before, about the conversations she had had with the other mothers, about the children's stories. As Sarah spoke, she watched Martha's expression change from concern to disbelief, from disbelief to defensiveness. "Sarah, please, you need to understand," Martha began as Sarah finished, the charged tone of voice of an institutional authority trying to end the conversation. "Pastor David is a man of God respected by all of us. He dedicates his entire life to the children of this community. For 20 years, he has been working with us without a single complaint. Without a single complaint, because he manipulates the children to keep a secret. Martha, he uses religious authority to make them think that this is normal, that it is a blessing from God," interrupted Jennifer, taking a step forward with her arms crossed. "And he was alone with my 9-year-old daughter in a secluded cabin, away from everyone, with a camera, asking her to keep it a secret. Do you think this is appropriate behavior of a religious leader?" Sarah added, keeping her tone firm but feeling the frustration grow. Martha sighed, taking off her glasses and rubbing her tired eyes. "Sarah, this is part of the one-on-one spiritual mentoring program. All parents signed a consent form at the beginning of the year authorizing individualized activities with the pastor. It's in church documents." Sarah felt as if the ground had disappeared from under her feet. "What consent form?" "I never signed anything authorizing my daughter to be alone with him in a secluded cabin. It was in the package of documents that all parents signed in January when the children signed up for the annual children's program. There was a specific section on one-on-one mentoring," Martha explained, now with a tone that mixed patience and condescension. Sarah felt the anger explode inside her. "So you're telling me that buried in the middle of a pile of papers, there was a vague authorization that allowed a grown man to be alone with children, take pictures of them, and ask them to keep it a secret? And do you think this is adequate protection?" "That's not how it works, Sarah. Pastor David has oversight of the church leadership. He is accountable regularly," Martha replied, but his voice was beginning to lose its conviction. That's when Lisa Patterson stepped forward, holding Tyler's hand, who had a red face and his eyes fixed on the ground. "Martha, my son told me today that Pastor David asks him to take off his shirt during these private sessions. Is this also part of the church-approved spiritual mentoring?" Martha turned pale. I don't know about that specifically. I would have to check with Pastor David what the pedagogical purpose is." "The pedagogical purpose," Amanda Reed repeated, her voice rising an octave. "My 8-year-old daughter told me that he makes her sit on his lap and touches her hair in a way that makes her uncomfortable. What part of the Bible teaches that this is appropriate?" Martha seemed to be finally grasping the gravity of the situation. She looked at the 4 children standing there, all visibly uncomfortable, all carrying the weight of secrets they had kept out of fear or manipulation. The expression on his face changed from defensive to horrified. I need to talk to Pastor David about this. I need to hear his side," Martha said, her voice now weak and uncertain. "No, Martha. You're not going to give him a chance to prepare an explanation or destroy evidence," Sarah said firmly. "You will call the authorities, now, or we're going to do it. Sarah, you're asking me to call the police to investigate one of our church's most respected leaders based on interpretations of concerned mothers," Martha argued, but her resistance was clearly weakening. "These are not interpretations, Martha. These are children's reports. These are facts. And if you refuse to protect these children, then you're just as guilty as he is," Sarah said, taking her cell phone out of her pocket. While this conversation was taking place on the porch of the main cabin, David Carter was on the other side of the camp, near the dormitories. He had seen the group of mothers coming and immediately realized something was wrong. Sarah wasn't supposed to be there. Emma shouldn't have been there. And if other mothers were present, it meant that they were talking, sharing information, connecting dots. David quickly entered the cabin that served as his office and administrative office and began to collect his belongings. He took his backpack, threw in some personal documents, his wallet and the car keys. Her heart pounded as her eyes raced around the room, looking for anything that might be incriminating. He knew he had left the camera in the secluded cabin the night before when Sarah had interrupted. Damn, that camera. If someone accessed the contents of that camera, it would all be over. David grabbed his jacket and walked out of the cabin through the back, trying to be discreet. He walked quickly toward the parking lot where his car was, keeping his head down, praying that no one would see him. But when he got close to the dirt road that was the only exit from the camp, his heart sank. Sarah, Jennifer, Lisa, and Amanda were blocking the way. The 4 women stood side by side on the narrow road, their arms crossed, their expressions determined. Behind them, Martha Stevens watched the scene with a mixture of shock and resignation. "Where do you think you're going, David?" Sarah asked, her voice sharp as a blade. David paused, calculating his options. He could still try to keep the facade. He could still use his authority, his reputation, his charisma. He forced a smile and took a few steps towards the women, his hands open in a gesture of innocence. "I was just going to the city to get some supplies for the camp." "There doesn't have to be all this drama," he said, trying to sound casual. "Supplies, with a backpack full of personal documents?" "You're running away, David," Jennifer said, stepping forward. "You are hysterical." "Completely hysterical," David replied, and now his voice had lost that pastoral softness and gained a sharp edge. "I didn't do anything wrong. These are completely legitimate spiritual practices. You don't understand the depth of missionary work. They don't understand what it means to create true spiritual connections with children." "Spiritual connections?" Lisa repeated, her voice trembling with anger. "You made my 11-year-old son take off his shirt and posed him for photos saying it was meant to represent purity. That's not spiritual connection, David. This is abuse." David looked around, seeing that he was surrounded. Martha was on the balcony of the cabin, watching. Other mothers who had remained in the camp began to leave the huts, attracted by the commotion. Children stopped their games to look. David realized that his escape was thwarted, so he changed tactics. His features hardened, and he pointed his finger at Sarah. "You will regret accusing me like this. I have influential friends in church leadership. I have lawyers. You will be expelled from the community for defamation." "I'm going to sue every one of you for slander," David shouted, the mask of goodness completely fallen off now. Sarah stepped forward, looking directly into David's eyes without blinking. "I've already called the police, David. They are on their way along with the county sheriff, and I recorded what I saw last night in the secluded cabin. You telling my daughter that it was a sacred secret. You with the camera in your hand. It's all on my phone." David's expression instantly changed, from confident and menacing to desperate and pale. His hands began to tremble. He looked at the road as if he were calculating whether he could run. But Sarah read his thoughts. "Don't try, David. You'll only make things worse for yourself," she said coldly. 20 minutes later, the sound of sirens echoed through the Rocky Mountains. 2 Boulder County police cruisers drove up the dirt road from Camp Harmony, kicking up clouds of red dust. Sheriff Daniel Cooper stepped out of the first patrol car, a man in his mid-50s, tall and imposing in his khaki uniform and badge gleaming in the afternoon sun. From the second car came a woman with short black hair, wearing a dark blazer over her police shirt, carrying a leather briefcase. "I'm Investigator Elena Rodriguez, who specializes in crimes against minors," introduced herself, her voice professional but with an underlying kindness. "Who made the call?" Sarah stepped forward, her hand still firmly holding Emma's. "It was me, Sarah Johnson, and these are Jennifer Martinez, Lisa Patterson, and Amanda Reed. We all have children who were victims of Missionary David Carter." Investigator Rodriguez looked at the group of mothers and children, then at David Carter, who was standing a few feet ahead, his backpack still on his back, his face now completely colorless. Then he looked at Martha Stevens, who was watching from afar, clearly in shock. "I will need each of you to give me a detailed account of what happened. But first, we need to ensure the safety and comfort of the children," Rodriguez said, kneeling to be at eye level with the 4 children. "You are safe now. No one will hurt them. I'm going to talk to each of you separately, in a quiet place, and you're going to tell me whatever you want to tell me. All right?" The children nodded timidly, and Rodriguez signaled to 2 other officers who had arrived with the patrol cars. They began preparing a protected area in the main cabin for the interviews with the children, while Rodriguez turned to Sarah. "Mrs. Johnson, can you show me exactly where the incident you witnessed last night took place?" asked the investigator. Sarah led Rodriguez to the secluded cabin at the bottom of the lot, explaining every detail along the way. The door was still unlocked. Rodriguez entered carefully, wearing gloves, observing the narrow bed, the small table, the camera that was still there where David had left it the night before. "Is this the camera?" Rodriguez asked, carefully picking her up and placing her inside a bag of evidence. "Yes, he was about to use it to take pictures of my daughter when I walked in," Sarah confirmed. Meanwhile, in the parking lot, Sheriff Cooper approached David Carter. "Mr. Carter, I need you to come with me to the police station to give a statement about the accusations that have been made against you," said the sheriff, his voice deep and authoritative. David tried once again to defend himself, but his voice came out shaky and unconscious. "This is absurd. I am a respected religious leader. You have no proof of anything. These women are having collective delusions. They are persecuting me." Sheriff Cooper held up the clear plastic bag containing the camera Rodriguez had just confiscated. "Let's check the contents of this camera and your computer, Mr. Carter. If you have nothing to hide, there is no reason to worry. But I'm sure we'll find plenty of answers in digital data." David turned completely pale. His hands trembled so much that he had to stuff them into his pockets to hide them. His eyes moved quickly from side to side, looking for a way out that didn't exist. And then, finally, he fell silent. That heavy, revealing silence of someone who knows he has been discovered, of someone whose mask, carefully constructed for years, had just shattered into 1,000 pieces. "I have a right to a lawyer," David said finally, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Yes, sir, you have all the rights guaranteed by the Constitution. But you'll need to come with us now," the sheriff replied, motioning for David to get into the patrol car. Sarah watched as David Carter was placed in the back seat of the police cruiser, his head bowed, his shoulders hunched. She felt a mixture of relief, validation, and a deep sadness for all the children who had suffered before anyone finally had the courage to act. She hugged Emma tightly, whispering in her daughter's ear, "It's over, my love. You are safe now. You've always been safe with me. If you're here, it's because this story deserves to be heard. I believe that what comes next will surprise you even more. Don't leave this video before you find out how it all ended. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of emotions, investigations, and revelations that shocked the entire Boulder community. Sarah could barely process the speed at which everything was happening. The day after David Carter's arrest, the story was all over the local newspapers. Respected missionary arrested on suspicion of crimes against minors, the headlines shouted. The investigation deepened quickly. Investigator Elena Rodriguez and her team worked day and night, examining the contents of David Carter's camera and personal computer that had been seized in the search of his home. What they found was far worse than Sarah could have ever imagined. Sarah received a call from Rodriguez on a rainy Tuesday, 2 weeks after the events at the camp. The investigator's voice was heavy as she spoke. "Mrs. Johnson, I need you to come to the police station. There are things I need to share with you and the other mothers," Rodriguez said. A few hours later, Sarah, Jennifer, Lisa, and Amanda were sitting in a meeting room at the Boulder County Sheriff's Office. Rodriguez entered, carrying a thick briefcase and a grim expression. She sat up and took a deep breath before starting to speak. "The content we find on David Carter's electronic devices is absolutely disturbing. We found more than 300 inappropriate photos of children from Mount Grace Church, taken over the course of 3 years," Rodriguez said, letting the words hang in the heavy air of the room. Sarah felt like she had been punched in the stomach. 300 photos, 3 years. How many children? How many families? We were able to identify at least 20 different children in the images. Some appear once or twice, others appear dozens of times over the years, Rodriguez continued. David Carter created an elaborate system of psychological manipulation. He used specific religious language to make the children believe that these situations were normal, that they were special blessings from God, that they were chosen. Jennifer began to cry silently, her hands covering her face. Lisa held her hand, her own eyes shining with suppressed tears. Amanda was pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. "He had a pattern," Rodriguez explained. "He especially chose children from single-parent families or families in situations of emotional or financial vulnerability. He knew that these children had less supervision, that their families relied more on support from the religious community, that they were less likely to question an authority figure. He chose me because I'm a single mother," Sarah whispered, the realization falling on her like a ton of bricks. "He knew I was vulnerable after the divorce, that I depended on the church for emotional and social support, that I would trust him completely." "Yes," Rodriguez confirmed with kindness. But Mrs. Johnson was the only mother who trusted her gut when she realized something was wrong. Emma was the only child who showed discomfort clearly enough for her mother to notice. "And thanks to your courage, Mrs. Johnson, we were able to stop this before more children were harmed." "How many?" Sarah asked, her voice breaking. "How many children did he actually abuse?" Rodriguez hesitated before answering. "Based on the testimonies we collected and the evidence we found, we believe that there were at least 12 direct victims of psychological and physical abuse. The other children in the photos were exposed to inappropriate situations, but not at the level of the primary victims." "And Emma?" Sarah asked, barely able to form the words. "Emma was one of the victims, but thanks to her quick intervention, the abuse did not progress to more serious levels. She will need psychological support, but proper therapy can help her process and overcome the trauma," Rodriguez explained. "You saved your daughter, Mrs. Johnson, and in doing so, he saved many others." "What happens to him now?" Lisa asked. "David Carter will be formally charged with multiple crimes, including psychological abuse of minors, production of inappropriate material involving children, and abuse of authority. Based on the evidence we have, he is facing a sentence of 15 to 25 years in prison. There is no possibility of him getting bail due to the seriousness of the crimes and the number of victims," Rodriguez replied. Sarah felt a deep relief mixed with sadness. Justice would be done, But nothing could erase what had happened. Nothing could return the stolen innocence of those 20 children. "And the church?" Jennifer asked, wiping tears from her face. "Did Mount Grace know anything?" "We are investigating this as well. So far, we have found no evidence that the church leadership was aware of what was happening. But clearly there were serious flaws in child protection protocols. The church is cooperating fully with the investigation and has already implemented drastic policy changes," Rodriguez said. 2 weeks later, Sarah was sitting in the waiting room of the child psychology clinic in downtown Boulder. She had carefully researched and chosen Dr. Rebecca Foster, a psychologist specializing in childhood trauma cases with more than 20 years of experience. The waiting room was welcoming, with walls painted light blue, colorful posters, and a shelf full of toys and children's books. Emma was next to Sarah, flipping through a picture book, but Sarah could see the tension in her daughter's small shoulders, the way her eyes weren't really reading the pages. When the office door opened and Dr. Foster appeared with a warm smile, Emma clung to Sarah's arm. "Hello, Emma. I'm Dr. Rebecca. But you can just call me Becca if you want," said the psychologist, crouching down to be at the girl's height. She was a woman of about 40, brown hair tied in a loose ponytail, round glasses, and a colorful cardigan over a t-shirt with butterfly drawings. Emma looked at her mother, who nodded encouragingly. "Do you want to come in and get to know my office? I have some really cool games in there," invited Dr. Foster, extending her hand. Emma hesitated for a moment longer before taking the psychologist's hand. Sarah stood in the waiting room, her hands sweaty, her heart tightened, praying that this first session would help Emma begin the healing process. The first few weeks of therapy were difficult. Emma had nightmares almost every night, waking up crying and screaming. She developed a fear of grown men, recoiling when any man approached her, even teachers at school or clerks in stores. She stopped singing, that activity she always loved so much. She became quieter, more withdrawn, spending hours alone in the room, drawing dark and disturbing figures. Sarah also started her own therapy because she knew that the emotional impact didn't just affect Emma, it affected the whole family. She had anxiety attacks thinking about all the what-ifs. What if he hadn't followed his instinct? What if she had let Emma go to camp unsupervised? What if he hadn't arrived on time? The sleepless nights piled up as Sarah mentally relived every moment, every decision. But gradually, week after week, session after session, Emma began to open up. She began to talk about her fears, about the confusion she felt when David Carter used religious words to justify behaviors that made her uncomfortable. She began to understand that none of this had been her fault, that she had done nothing wrong, that the responsibility lay entirely with the adult who had abused her trust and authority. Sarah also began to connect with the other mothers whose children had been victims. Jennifer, Lisa, and Amanda became more than known to the church. They became allies, friends, sisters in the fight for healing and justice. They began meeting every week at Jennifer's house in an informal support group where they shared feelings, healing strategies, fears, and small but significant victories. It was at one of these meetings, about 2 months after the events at the camp, that Sarah had an idea. They were sitting in Jennifer's room drinking tea and talking about how their lives had changed, when Sarah said, "We need to do something bigger. We cannot let this be forgotten. We need to educate other families about warning signs, about how to trust maternal instinct, about the importance of creating safe environments for children to speak up when they feel uncomfortable." "What are you thinking?" Jennifer asked, leaning forward with interest. "An organization, non-profit, offering free resources for parents to learn how to recognize warning signs, workshops on child protection, support groups for affected families," Sarah explained, the ideas flowing quickly now that she had verbalized the thought. "And a hotline for complaints," Lisa added, "a place where children or parents can call anonymously if they are worried about something. And speaking at schools and churches about how to implement proper child protection policies," Amanda said, her eyes shining with possibility. Thus was born the Mother's Instinct Initiative, a non-profit organization founded by Sarah, Jennifer, Lisa, and Amanda, dedicated to child protection and parental education. Sarah used her savings to rent a small office in downtown Boulder, and the four women took turns volunteering their time between work and family responsibilities. The Boulder community reacted with a mixture of outrage and support. Many members of Mount Grace felt betrayed and ashamed that they had trusted David Carter so much without question. Others have rallied around the affected families, offering practical and emotional support. The church leadership publicly apologized at a special service dedicated to the victims and implemented strict policies, including the fundamental rule that no adult could be alone with a child under any circumstances. There would always be at least 2 adults present. Sarah began lecturing, first timidly in small groups at church, then in local schools, and eventually at regional conferences on child protection. She talked about the importance of listening when children express discomfort, about how to recognize signs of manipulation, about the difference between legitimate concern and paranoia, about trusting the mother's instinct even when everyone says you're overreacting. Before we continue, help bring real stories to those who really care. If you want to be part of this mission, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell. 8 months after the events that changed their lives forever, Sarah was sitting in the Boulder County Courthouse, surrounded by Jennifer, Lisa, Amanda, and dozens of other Mount Grace church families who had come to support the victims. David Carter's trial had begun 3 weeks earlier, and today was the day of the verdict. The prosecutor had presented devastating evidence over the weeks of the trial. 12 children had given video testimonies, their courageous words echoing through the courtroom, recounting their experiences, describing psychological manipulation, the way David Carter had used his religious authority to make completely inappropriate situations seem normal and even sacred. Emma did not have to testify in person, much to Sarah's relief. His testimony, recorded in a protected environment, had been enough, showing his courage even through the screen. Sarah had held her daughter's hand at home as they watched it on television. Emma was now 10 years old and growing stronger by the day, but that process was still painful. David Carter's defense had tried to argue that it was all misunderstood, that he was just a dedicated spiritual leader whose pedagogical methods were being misinterpreted by paranoid minds. Her lawyer had tried to discredit the children's testimonies, to suggest that the mothers were influencing what their children said, to plant doubts about the digital evidence. But the evidence was irrefutable. 300 photos, 3 years of meticulous documentation of inappropriate behavior, 20 children, 12 direct victims, clear patterns of manipulation and abuse of authority. There was no reasonable doubt. The jury deliberated for only 4 hours before returning to the courtroom. Sarah felt her heart pound so hard she could hear it in her ears as the jurors came in and took their seats. The judge, a serious man in his 60s with completely white hair, asked the jury spokesman to stand up. The jury spokesman stood, a middle-aged man in a simple suit, holding a white paper in his slightly shaking hands. The tension in the room was palpable, the air dense with anticipation and fear. Sarah could hear Jennifer breathing heavily beside her, could feel Lisa's sweaty hands squeezing hers. "Have they reached a verdict?" asked the judge, his voice echoing through the silent room. "Yes, Your Excellency," replied the jury spokesman, his voice firm despite his trembling hands. "In the case of the state of Colorado against David Michael Carter, in the accusations of psychological abuse of minors in multiple instances, what is the jury's verdict?" "Guilty on all charges," the spokesman said. A collective murmur ran through the courtroom. Sarah felt the tears finally escape, running freely down her face. They were not tears of sadness, but of deep and overwhelming relief. Jennifer began to sob next to him. Lisa covered her face with her hands. Amanda hugged them both. Behind them, other families reacted in different ways, some crying, others in stunned silence, others hugging each other. Sarah looked straight ahead to where David Carter was sitting at the defense table. He had visibly aged during the 8 months since his arrest. His hair was grayer, his face thinner, his shoulders hunched. When the verdict was read, he bowed his head, his handcuffed hands shaking on the table. There was no protest, there was no denial, just that heavy resignation of someone who was finally facing the consequences of years of manipulation and abuse. The judge slammed the gavel, restoring order to the room. He looked at David Carter with an expression of barely concealed disgust and said, "Mr. Carter, the jury found you guilty of 12 counts of psychological abuse of minors, production of inappropriate material involving children, and abuse of authority in a position of trust. The sentence will be handed down in 2 weeks. Until then, you will remain in custody." 2 weeks later, Sarah was back in court for the sentencing hearing. This time, Emma was with her. The girl, now 10 years old, had asked to be present. She wanted to see with her own eyes the man who had abused her trust face justice. Sarah had hesitated, worried that it would be too much for Emma to handle, but Dr. Foster had encouraged her, saying that it might be an important step in the girl's healing process to see that responsible adults had believed in her and acted to protect her. The judge entered the room, everyone stood up, and then he began to read the sentence. His voice was deep and charged with moral authority as he spoke about the gravity of the crimes, about the betrayal of trust, about the lasting impact on the victims. "David Michael Carter, you have used your position of spiritual authority to manipulate, abuse, and traumatize innocent children who have been entrusted to your care. You betrayed not only these children, but their families, your community, and the values you claim to represent. The crimes he committed will leave scars that will last the lives of these victims," the judge said, his voice steady. "Considering the gravity and extent of his crimes, the number of victims, and the prolonged period during which this behavior occurred, I sentence him to 22 years in state prison without the possibility of parole for the first 15 years. Additionally, upon release, you will be registered as a sex offender and will be subject to permanent monitoring. 22 years. Sarah closed her eyes and took a deep breath, feeling a huge weight leave her shoulders. Justice had been done. That man could no longer harm any child for a long, long time. And when he was eventually released, he would be an old, monitored man, unable to return to a position of trust with children. Sarah looked at Emma beside her. The girl was looking at David Carter with an expression Sarah had never seen before. It wasn't fear, it wasn't anger, it was something more complex. It was the expression of someone who was watching a monster be revealed as simply a weak, pathetic man who had made terrible choices and would now face the consequences. "He can't hurt me anymore," Emma whispered, and Sarah realized it wasn't a question. It was a statement. A deep understanding that the power David Carter had wielded over her had been irreversibly broken. "No, my love, he cannot." "Never again," Sarah confirmed, hugging her daughter tightly. As they left the courthouse that afternoon, the Colorado winter sun shone over the Rocky Mountains, creating a spectacle of golden light against the snowy peaks. Sarah, Emma, Jennifer, Lisa, Amanda, and dozens of other families gathered on the courthouse steps. Reporters from several local newspapers were present, cameras filming, microphones extended. Sarah gave a quick interview, her words careful but powerful. Today, justice was served. But this would not have happened if mothers had not trusted their instincts, if children had not found the courage to speak up, if a community had not decided that protecting our children is more important than protecting reputations. I hope this story serves as a reminder that we should always believe children when they tell us something is wrong. The story made headlines in local newspapers for weeks. Religious leader sentenced to 22 years for abuse of minors. Brave mothers save children from predator. Maternal instinct leads to justice. Sarah received hundreds of messages of support, some from mothers who had similar stories, others from people who simply wanted to thank her for having the courage to act. The following months were one of gradual healing and transformation. Emma continued her therapy with Dr. Foster, and little by little the nightmares subsided. She returned to singing, shyly at first, only at home, but eventually rejoined the school choir. Sarah saw her daughter laugh again, genuinely, that crystalline laugh that had faded during the months of trauma. 2 years after the events that changed their lives forever, Sarah Johnson was no longer the same person. She had become a recognized advocate for children's rights, a respected voice in the Boulder community and beyond. The Mother's Instinct initiative she had founded with Jennifer, Lisa, and Amanda had grown far beyond her initial expectations. The small office that Sarah had rented with her savings now had a staff of 5 full-time employees and a dozen volunteers. They offered free workshops for parents on how to recognize warning signs, a helpline for families dealing with suspected abuse, support groups for victims and their families, and educational programs for schools and faith-based organizations on how to implement appropriate child protection policies. Sarah gave lectures regularly, not only in Boulder, but in cities throughout Colorado and surrounding states. She spoke in schools, churches, synagogues, community centers, anywhere that invited her. Their lectures were always packed, mothers and fathers eager to learn how to protect their children, how to recognize predatory behavior disguised as mentoring or spiritual guidance. One of the most impactful talks Sarah gave was at a statewide conference on child protection in Denver. The room had a capacity for 300 people and was completely full, with people standing at the back. Sarah took the stage, looked at that sea of attentive faces, and began to tell her story. She talked about Emma, about the early signs she had almost ignored, about the social pressure to trust authority figures, about that tightness in her chest that every mother knows when something threatens her child. She talked about the decision to follow the bus to the camp, about what she saw through the window of the secluded cabin, about the confrontation with David Carter. But most importantly, she talked about society that teaches women, especially mothers, to be polite, not to question authority figures, not to trust their own instincts. She talked about how the maternal instinct is not paranoia, it is protection. Like when something feels wrong, it's usually wrong, even if everyone around says otherwise. "You know your child better than anyone in this world," Sarah said, her voice echoing through the quiet room. "If he changes his behavior, if he shows fear, if he recoils at someone's touch, pay attention. Don't ignore it. Don't minimize it. Don't let them convince you that you're overreacting. A minute of courage can save a life. A week of research could protect dozens of children." When Sarah finished her talk, the room erupted in applause. People stood up, many crying, some coming forward afterward to share their own stories, to thank them for finding validation and courage in Sarah's words. Emma, now 11, was much better. She still went to therapy, but no longer weekly, only once a month for maintenance and ongoing support. She had returned to smiling, to playing with friends, to trusting adults in a healthy but conscious way. She learned to set boundaries, to say no when something made her uncomfortable, to speak up whenever she needed help. Mount Grace Church had undergone a complete transformation. The leadership had implemented strict child protection policies, including the fundamental rule that no adult could be alone with a child under any circumstances. There would always be at least 2 adults present at any activity with children. Security cameras were installed in all spaces where children's activities took place. Criminal background checks became mandatory for anyone working with children. Most importantly, the church created a safe channel where children and parents could report troubling behavior without fear of retaliation. The David Carter case, as it became known in the region, has become a case study in training programs for religious leaders across the country. Universities that offered theology courses began to include modules on ethics, appropriate boundaries, and child protection, using Sarah and Emma's story as an example of what can happen when protection systems fail and the importance of believing in children. On that fall afternoon in Boulder, 2.5 years after that Friday that changed everything, Sarah was sitting on the couch in her living room next to Emma. They were flipping through a photo album Sarah had created from the past 2 years, happy moments captured in colorful images. There were photos of Emma smiling on the first day back at school, of Sarah receiving a community award by the Mother's Instinct Initiative, of the 4 founding mothers celebrating the organization's 1-year anniversary, of Emma dressed as a superhero on Halloween, a choice that had made Sarah cry with pride and excitement. "I remember when I was little and I was afraid of everything," Emma said, looking at a picture of herself a few months ago, smiling as she held a trophy from a singing contest at school. "You're still small, my love," Sarah joked, messing up her daughter's curly hair. "You know what I mean, Mom. I remember when I had nightmares every night, when I was afraid of grown men." "When she couldn't sing," Emma said, her voice now more mature than Sarah would expect from an 11-year-old. "But trauma has a way of making children grow up faster than they should." "What now?" Sarah asked gently. "Now I know it wasn't my fault, that I didn't do anything wrong, that he was wrong, and that you will always protect me," Emma replied, turning to hug her mother. Sarah felt her heart overflow with gratitude, love, relief. The journey had not been easy. There were nights when Sarah would wake up in a cold sweat, wondering if she should have noticed the signs sooner, if she could have protected Emma in another way, if she could have prevented other children from suffering before her. But therapy had helped Sarah understand that she had done exactly what she needed to do at the right time, that guilt had no place in healing, that she had been the mother Emma needed when it mattered most. "Do you know what Dr. Becker said to me in the last session?" asked Emma, still hugging her mother. "What, my love? That I'm brave, that many children can't talk about what happened to them, but I did. And that it can help other children be brave too," Emma said, and Sarah could hear the pride in her daughter's voice. "Dr. Becker is completely right. You are the bravest girl I know. And you've helped other children, you know. Through our work at Mother's Instinct, through our history, countless families have learned to pay attention, to believe, to act," Sarah said, kissing the top of Emma's head. As the sun set over the Rocky Mountains, painting the sky orange and purple, Sarah hugged Emma and whispered in her daughter's ear, "I will always protect you. I will always believe in you, and I will always fight for you, no matter what. It doesn't matter who. You always come first." Emma smiled, that radiant smile that had been gone for months but was now back in all its glory. "I know, Mom. You're my real superhero." And in that moment, Sarah knew that she had fulfilled the most important purpose of her life, to be the voice your daughter needed when her own voice was being silenced, to be the protection Emma deserved, to be the mother who believed, who acted, who fought, even when everyone said she was exaggerating. The journey of healing would continue. There would always be difficult days, there would always be moments of painful remembrance, but they would walk together, stronger, more united, and surrounded by a community of warrior mothers who learned the most important lesson of all. Protecting our children is not paranoia. It is love in its purest and most powerful form. And the maternal instinct, that insistent whisper deep in your chest that tells you when something is wrong, exists for a reason. Trust him, always. This story isn't just about Sarah and Emma. It's about all the mothers who felt that tightness in their chest and decided to take action. It's about all the kids who have found the courage to speak out. It's about the importance of believing, of protecting, of fighting for the safety of our children, above any institutional loyalty, above any social pressure, above any fear of being wrong. Because in the end, a mother's greatest responsibility is not to be polite or convenient. It is to be fierce in protecting your children. If this story has touched you, if it has changed the way you view motherhood protection, help spread that message. Share with other mothers, with other fathers, with anyone who has children or works with children. Because knowledge is protection, and the more people know how to recognize the signs, the more children will be safe. Don't go out. Take the next step in this journey by watching the next video on our channel, which will appear here on the screen. In it, we will continue to discover stories that touch the heart. Stories that teach us about courage, about maternal love, about the importance of trusting our instincts. A big hug, and see you in the next heartwarming story that will make you believe in the power of a mother who never gives up on protecting her children.